President Biden and Vice President Harris are talking voting rights in Georgia. They will push the Senate to eliminate the filibuster in order to get legislation passed. But some Democrats say they want to see action before they hear another speech. Well, to discuss today's visit and the push for voting rights legislation, I want to bring in Bishop Reginald Jackson and Antjuan Seawright. Bishop Jackson is a presiding prelate of the Sixth Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Georgia. And Antjuan Seawright is CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Thank you both for spending some time with us today. Welcome, Bishop. I want to begin with you. What do you want to hear from the president today, and what exactly is at stake when you think about marginalized communities and Americans?
Well, first of all, we need to hear the president state emphatically and passionately his commitment to making sure that this federal legislation passes. All across the country, we've seen where states have passed voting legislation whose real intent is to suppress and make it harder for people of color to vote. The president needs to make it just as clear as he did last week that he is going to do all that he can to make sure that this federal legislation passes. In addition to that, it's imperative that this is not only a Democratic issue, but this is a national issue. So therefore, not only should every Democrat, but every Republican. Historically, voting has been a bipartisan issue, and it needs to be bipartisan now.
Antjuan, I want to turn to you. A number of Georgia Democrats are joining the president and vice president today, but gubernatorial candidate and voting rights advocate Stacey Abrams said she couldn't make it. What does that tell you? Should we be looking into that?
We should not. And look, Jerika, before we talk about the who is going to show up today, I think we should talk about the what and the where. The fact that the president is going to visit Georgia, perhaps one of the most consequential states in the previous election, because it gave him the majority in the U.S. Senate when black voters in Georgia showed up in very handsome, untraditional fashion to give 2 U.S. senators. That gave the president the ability to pass what I believe to be a very progressive agenda in this country. So he's going to Georgia, the battleground for civil rights, and also think the battleground for voting rights. And so we talk about who shows up. Look, he's taken one of the most transformational black women in this country, the vice president of the United States, with him to Georgia. If I were advising Stacey Abrams' campaign, I would say to the candidate, look, there's tons of ground to cover in the state of Georgia. Let the president do his lifting in Atlanta, and let's spend our time elsewhere carrying the message of voting rights, infrastructure, and other quality of life issues that Georgians will have to deal with after the president and the vice president is gone. And the fact of the matter is, Stacey Abrams has her own campaign to run as a candidate for governor, not candidate for president of the United States or any other office other than the office she is seeking in Georgia.
Bishop, your church joined a lawsuit last year suing Governor Brian Kemp and the state of Georgia over its new election overhaul laws. What's the latest with the legal action, and why are you against the law?
We're against the law for several reasons. Number one, these laws only came about because of the big lie told by the former president. And in addition to that, because of the huge turnout of blacks in the 2020 election. The AME Church in Georgia, for example, we have what we call Operation Voter Turnout. Our goal was to get 75% of blacks to vote early, and they did. The black turnout was so great that now across the country, and especially here in Georgia, they say we've got to find a way to make sure this doesn't happen in 2022 and 2024. That's what these elections are about. And look at what they're doing. They're trying to do away with ballot drop boxes, trying to make it difficult to vote early by absentee voting. Then on top of that, even seniors. We had mobile voting booths, which traveled to senior centers to make it easier for seniors to vote. That is now against the law. Senator Mitch McConnell says if you read these bills, you'll find out that they're not bad. Well, the problem is we read the bills and we see how bad they can be. And our democracy is at risk. If we do not get this federal legislation, it will no longer be government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It will be where politicians will select their voters rather than the voters electing their leadership. SB 202 is horrible, and we need federal legislation to make sure those horrors do not persist.
Antjuan, speaking of things happening at the federal level, the House has passed a number of bills awaiting Senate action. They include provisions to protect access to the ballot box, but also they seek to end voter roll purges and partisan gerrymandering, as well as making federal campaign spending more transparent. What do you think is the most important element to address at the federal level?
I don't think there's one thing or another that supersedes the priority of passing something in order to push back on these 19 states that have passed 34 pieces of legislation to suppress and suffocate our votes. The people who are impacted by this legislation the most are people who look like myself and Bishop Jackson, black voters, the people who continue to show up in election after election to help save this country. And the fact of the matter is, when we look back historically at voting rights legislation, it's always been done in a very bipartisan manner in terms of renewing the Voting Rights Act. Now Republicans have gotten clever because election after election, black voters show up, the tectonic plates shift, and so they want to silence and suffocate our votes. The way you do that is by hitting the nerve center. The nerve center in this country is voting rights. And so what has to happen at the federal level is we have to protect and expand opportunity to vote. There are a number of bills pending in the U.S. Senate that I think will do that. It's now up for politicians in the U.S. Senate, and particularly those who describe themselves as Democrats, where we have a majority, to have the political courage to step up and help save this country once again.
But how do you change the minds of those people who for months now have said that they're not supporting these bills, Antjuan?
Well, it's simple as this. It's either you want to have influence and power, or you want to go back to fighting for influence and power. We have the majority because black voters showed up in Atlanta, they showed up in Milwaukee, they showed up in Detroit. These bills that have been filed all across the country will prohibit or perhaps prevent that from happening again. We all know if Mitch McConnell had his way in this current makeup of the U.S. Senate, some of the things we've been able to do, whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, whether it's Build Back Better potentially, or whether it's even the CARES Act, these things would have never gotten done. Or look at the historic number of African-American judges that have come through the U.S. Senate. All these things that have resulted as a result of a majority of Democrats in the U.S. Senate would have never been done under Democratic President Joe Biden had he not had the help in the U.S. Senate. And so I think we have to make it plain. I think we have to take this message to Georgia. I think others are going to have to carry this message to Arizona and West Virginia, where the wheel seems to be clogged, and remind people the stakes are too high. And for us, this is about survival. This is about life or death. There are no redos or do-overs when it comes to getting things done to help save and elevate communities that will be tremendously impacted by the lack of action.
Bishop, to you now, I know that your state is celebrating a national championship, but as you know, this visit from the president and vice president is also being called insufficient and unwelcome if they don't have actual veto-proof majority to pass voting rights legislation. What are parishioners and voters in your community telling you?
Well, in fact, they're very concerned. Very concerned, number one, that again, they demonstrated their power in 2020. And we are determined that that power is not going to be diluted. And let me be very clear. We demand action. I have no problem with those who decided not to show up today. I think all of us have the same goal. But we have got to see that, in fact, this federal legislation passes. That's what our parishioners want to see. That's what black voters want to see. And that's what we're going to work like the heck to see that it gets passed, turn every arm. Nothing changes without pressure. And so we've got to apply some pressure to change the way some people are thinking.
Bishop Reginald Jackson and Antjuan Seawright, always good to see you. Thank you.